Okay, thank you so much for joining us this very hopefully exciting session. Good question, and hopefully we will get very interesting answers. Are we changing? Are we changing in terms of investors' profile, investors' backgrounds, and we are going to talk specifically about venture capital space today. In different countries, we have actually very interesting panelists today with very different backgrounds. So that's going to be the first question to all of you. I, for one, started a venture capital fund in Japan just a couple months ago at the end of May with two other female partners. One of them is here, Kathy Matsui, and Seki Miwa, and myself. So 3 women, we got together and we launched a venture capital fund. And everybody said, wow, women run fund. Never seen this before. I hope this is not going to be the case in a few years, maybe even next year. There'll be more funds like ourselves. But hopefully, we are actually seeing a very positive trend. And whether my hope is correct or not, we will hear views from our panelists. So let's start off with the Silicon Valley voice. Cheryl, first question. Are faces changing? Faces that you see in Silicon Valley in the venture capital space, are they changing? You've been in this space for like what, 20 some years, almost, close to 30 years. You must be one of the first female venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. So has it been changing, or what do you say?
Yes, Yumiko, absolutely has been changing. As I was sharing earlier, I started investing in 1998 with Intel Capital in the Silicon Valley. And there was just a report that came out from PitchBook this week that now showed that 17% of the general venture partners in the San Francisco Bay Area are women. And I will tell you, that is a massive jump since 1998, when I could barely ever sit in a room where I was not the only woman in the room. So that is great progress. And in addition, not only are we seeing women allocating capital, but we're also seeing a lot more women starting companies and running companies here in the Silicon Valley. And a lot of that is attributable to, I think, the millennial generation, where there is just a much stronger, I think, number of women coming out of the universities here who are taking their research and taking their work into a startup.
So that's a very positive response I got from the first speaker. So let's go to Korea. Cindy, Korea, in my understanding, if I understand correctly, it's very similar to Japan when it comes to gender diversity. It's not exactly a role model for many countries, and we're kind of struggling, but join the club, right? So yeah. In that context, what do you see in terms of changes? Are they happening? Are they not happening?
Sure. So to give you a little bit more context, I joined SoftBank Ventures Asia back in 2014. So when I joined, I was one of the very few. Back then, we created this chat room with female VC. There used to be only 20-some members, but now the number has increased a ton. So now when I look at the members of the chat room, it has increased up to about 210. So the number has gone up significantly. So I try to think about the reasons why things are changing. It's because the VC firms, their investment target, when we're reviewing companies, a lot of the companies, their target audience is female. So in order to understand what they really want and why these services work, I think the VC firms are realizing they need to have diversity. So I think, so we are seeing more companies hiring female investment team members, but I would love to see more senior, like partners or CEOs of VC funds that are started by female. I would love to see more of that. But definitely things are changing. We see more female sitting in IC member and also being on LP. So we are seeing positive progression.
Okay, so another very positive response. Let's go to Japan. Jonathan, I'm asking you the same question, but just wanted to make sure people understand diversity, not in the sense of gender diversity, that's one of them, but also all kinds of diversity. It could be Japanese, non-Japanese, and you don't look very Japanese, so you're probably not
I
typical.
can be fooled. I can fool people from time to time.
But he and I went to school together, and he actually came to Japan almost immediately after business school. So you've been here for a long time. So what do you see? What have you been seeing in terms of landscape in the venture capital space in Japan?
So let me start by talking about what I've seen in society as a whole. When I first came to Shinjuku, I was amazed by this mass of hundreds of people, all black hair, just all roughly the same height, and I couldn't believe it. Now, if you go to that same place, you don't see anybody with black hair. It's purple and green and orange. I think Japanese society has diversified significantly. I think over that time, investment and the venture capital space has also diversified, so that there are many foreign founders, a lot of women founders, and then obviously women investors as well. It's in Japan, I think, a slow process, but you definitely see it in many different areas.
So the answer is yes. It wasn't. Are you sure it wasn't Halloween night?
Then you get real diversity. Yeah.
So you really feel like things have been changing quite a bit in terms of diversity in general, the larger society, but what's happening in the venture capital?
Yeah. So in a sense, I think that it's funny in Japan. A lot of what I've seen is that the gender diversity has in many cases been driven by foreign influx. So I've seen I've met a number of Chinese women who are starting startups, and then obviously foreigners, people from all over the world. One of the companies that I've invested in called Moneytree has people from 25 different countries, and it's a company of less than 100 people. And so it's pretty incredible when you think of that kind of diversity in the tech sector in Japan, but it's definitely increasing. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about larger companies here, because we have Mr. Inagaki who can share, hopefully your perhaps different views, because again, you're mostly dealing with larger companies. Faces changing in terms of institutional investors' faces, in terms of large companies, or not?
So I work for Daiichi Life, life insurance company. So I have been with a company for 35 years. I'm a typical I represent the male dominant background group of Japan, maybe. But I see a lot of changes happening, especially in the younger generations. I think, well, this is a G1 camp, so I think all of us feel that vibe coming from the millennials and Generation Z. And venture capitalists. So we have partnered with Murakami-san through Empowers. A lot of venture capitalists, I think, is starting to happen, those movements. And also the ventures, the new startups, a lot of new faces, young, gender-wise, it's very diverse. But let me talk about a little from a large institutional investor sentiment. So we did a survey with Life Insurance Association of Japan, and we questioned about 60 investors and about 500 corporates. What is your top 3 main themes going forward? And diversity, the word diversity came third. Well, the number 1 was climate change. The second was corporate governance, and diversity came third. And the ranks is coming up year by year. So in the institutional investor world, there's a real attention to diversity, and I feel that's coming, and it's becoming, I think, one of the major topics when we engage with listed companies. So I think the movement is happening.
Well, thank you. So, I mean, all of you said yes, it is changing. That's a very a good answer I was hoping for. But why then is it happening? Why are we seeing different faces versus in the past? Can people make money out of diversity? Is it possible to measure economic impact or economic implications by having diversity in your company, for example, Daiichi Life, for example? Can you talk a little bit about the economic case for diversity? I would imagine there is one. That's why people are doing it. But how do you?
Yeah, actually, we have a separate fund that is devoted to ventures, small cap growth companies, and for the past several years, it has been outperforming our legacy portfolio. So there should be a impact from diversity, but we're not able to quantify the effect of diversity. But I think there is a element that will create value to the companies. So, but to be honest, we are not able to quantify at this moment.
So if you cannot quantify the economic value, how would you convince people to promote diversity?
Mm-hmm. So this is my personal view, and talking to some venture startup companies. So let me talk about Daiichi. So our history is about over 100 years. We have this legacy business model, and there is a huge burden to transform. And talking to a young ventures, they address the social challenges directly, and they set up the business model to tackle the social challenges. So what corporates do is challenge our social challenges and create value through their businesses. And more, startups with more sensitive to social diversity and social challenges are, I think they're in a better position to create value compared to, long history companies, large corporates who has business model that is adapted to the high growth post-war boom. So I think those are the, real differences between the capital, the value creation of each company.
Okay, thank you. And also, perhaps there are maybe more data points in other countries such as US or Europe compared to Korea and Japan, just because there are probably more female capitalists and more female founders in the startup space, for example. So maybe there are maybe good cases that we can make by quantifying the economic impact in the US. Cheryl, do you have anything that you can share on that front?
Yes. And I do think there's some that you can quantify, and there's also some that you cannot quantify just by having a diversity of perspectives, experiences on a problem set. And as we all know, we have as a global business community, we have a problem set, and I think climate was one of the number one items where we have a problem set. And so I think, as we tackle problems head on, having those diverse perspectives, experiences, and learnings can only help us solve things and move faster. The data that I'd like to share that is coming out of the US here is by the Kauffman Foundation, which is a pretty well-regarded research firm that supports entrepreneurship. And they actually did a survey of 20,000 startups since the year 2000 here in the US. And they looked at the diversity of the team. So it didn't necessarily say that the founder had to be female, but there was gender and race diversity across the team. So they put people in, a diverse team versus a non-diverse team. And what they found is a 30%, that's 30% better financial performance from the diverse teams over that period of time that they studied than the non-diverse teams. And that resulted in better financial returns for their investors. So I think that's a pretty compelling data set that we have from here.
Yeah, no, I think these are pretty good, impressive numbers. So just coming back to Japan, Jonathan, being the non-Japanese venture capitalist who's been here for a long time, have sort of witnessing changes that have been taking place in a larger society. What advantage do you think you have just because you are not one of many as an investor?
So I think there are a variety of benefits. I mean, there are both benefits and drawbacks you get by being a foreigner and in Japan particularly. But by having seen how things work in a different place, you get a sense for how things might work differently in Japan. And then at least you have a vision. It can give you a vision towards how you can sort of bend a company or bend sort of the world in your direction. Then the other thing is that when I look at entrepreneurs, at people to invest in, what I look for often is for somebody who has a chip on his shoulder or her shoulder. Basically somebody who feels that he or she has something to prove. Because that's the kind of person who can persevere. Starting a venture company, no matter where it is extremely difficult. Most companies fail. And it takes somebody who has real sort of stick-to-itiveness, or I don't know what you call it, to get through that gate. And certainly women in Japan fall into that category, at least a certain set do, who've been frustrated and wanted to start their own company. And there are a lot of foreigners in that set as well. So I think that may explain some of the success of the numbers that Cheryl has talked about. So I think they do fit, actually.
Thank you. I wanted to also talk about Asia outside Japan. And Cindy, you mentioned earlier in your comment that you are seeing quite a few startups started by women or minority background people, and you being one of a very few female capitalists in this Asian context. Does your background help you in terms of identifying these founders, these startups, which might have sort of edge in terms of identifying interesting market opportunities, growth opportunities? What's your view on that?
So because I'm female, I do definitely get more, I guess, access to great female entrepreneurs, because they reach out and when they want to speak with somebody within my firm, they will pinpoint at me. They say, I want to speak to her because she will understand my business better. So definitely the referrals and also cool contacts, I do get a lot. However, what I try to be careful is that when I'm bringing any company to our investment committee, I don't want anybody to think I'm bringing a company because of their diversity or their ESG purpose. I want everyone to know that when I'm bringing a company forward in front of our IC, they meet our criteria, they're excellent. So I think I try, so I do have a lot of inflow. Perhaps because of that, I also get very high quality of female founders. So I am able to bring them forward. But one thing, as I mentioned, that I try to be very mindful is I'm not favoring any gender in particular, just because I am a female.
Interesting point. Actually, I have similar situation. Luckily, Kathy, you're sitting there. We actually have seen quite a few inquiries from female funders. They hear about our fund and female-run fund, and they will come to us because I guess founders feel as if we can understand their businesses better. So definitely a benefit in that sense. But also, I totally understand your point. You actually don't want to favor just based on the gender element. There has to be a very compelling business case for us to be able to say, yes, it's a good company to invest in. So that's a good point. So just going to this idea of innovation that can be driven by, or that should be driven by diversity. And when we say diversity, it's really diversity of thoughts. It's not necessarily about gender or anything else, just the really different ideas. And I think, John, that's the point you're trying to make earlier. So do you think that perhaps one of the challenges Japan faces in terms of promoting innovative environment is that the lack of diversity in terms of the way people look at the world? Do you think that is starting to change, and what do you think needs to happen in terms of promoting the diversity of thoughts? Not, again, at this point, we're talking about very broad sense of diversity, so that we can have more innovative companies, innovative products, services coming out of this country.
So first, I'd have to qualify that by saying that Japan has been famous for its creativity and new product development for years, at least since the 60s and 70s at the very least. That said, there is I think the global perception of Japanese uniformity is greater than the actual what you see on the ground. But what I see changing is internationalization. Both many Japanese traveling and spending significant parts of their lives overseas, and then coming back to Japan, and then foreigners coming into Japan, and that mix. I think I think it stimulates different views of how the world could be, and forces people really to think about what might happen and what could change. And so I do think that's a measure of creativity. The other area that I think is important to think about is creativity in what, right? So there's technical sort of development creativity, which you see a lot in chip foundries and very technical fields. But then there's a lot of social engineering kind of creativity, which you see in a lot of the new the fintech companies, finding new ways of funding people and entrepreneurs, and that I think Japan has been slower, but that there's as well interesting opportunity there because of the changes sort of catching up, and so I think it's an exciting time there as well.
Thank you. In terms of the impact on innovation coming from diversity, Cheryl, I would like to ask you this question because Silicon Valley until recently, maybe still today, is very much male-dominant environment. Although, as you said, that the things are changing slowly, but still, innovation has been the main driver for Silicon Valley's companies. How do you see diversity playing a role in terms of promoting innovation in the Silicon Valley context?
Yes, you make a really good point. There's been progress, and then there's also been, in some ways, to slow progress. And in terms of innovation, I mean, I started with Intel when you didn't have a PC in your home, let alone having the cell phones. And, you know, that's lives have been changed. I've been disappointed with the innovation in the Silicon Valley, kind of focused around the social platforms and things like that that are more advertising driven. And in some ways, I don't think that is, you know, the innovation that we're really after. I am going to cite something that is giving me a lot of excitement. I have been working with a number of women medtech entrepreneurs who are solving for low-cost treatments of cervical cancer. One of our entrepreneurs just sold their company that they founded in college on postpartum hemorrhaging to Merck for $270 million. Jessie Becker Alexander, I work with her, was the founder of that company. Y Combinator, which is the well-known accelerator in Silicon Valley, just had a class of medtech entrepreneurs, and they had half of them were women. You know, doing innovation around women's health, you know, issues that affect half the planet. And so that gets me excited, that type of innovation.
Thank you. That's like a very exciting development here. Cindy, because you are in Korea and in Japan and Korea relatively, you know, very similar when it comes to diversity, we could do better. But I just, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like in Korea, a lot of new companies, a lot of startups are really more diverse, a lot more diverse, and they are really embracing global markets in a much more dynamic way than perhaps compared to some Japanese startups. Can you just tell us what's happening in the Korean startup scene in terms of how diverse the landscape is becoming? I'm not talking just about you know, entertainment industry, which has really showed amazing momentum, just embracing the global markets, but in general, startup scene. So if you can just share some thoughts on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we do see, so I would say when I started, a lot of the startups were back in 2014, 15-ish. More startups were targeting local Korean markets, but now when good startups are coming out, they're not just targeting for local markets. They always have more bigger view than just local markets. So in order to address other countries' needs, you need to have more diverse perspective, not only just gender, but also in terms of nationality, etc. So when I see my portfolios hiring, they're not just looking to hire Koreans, and they are trying to embrace different language. So even though the management team's language English level of proficiency isn't perfect, they like to hire foreigners who are working in Korea so they can study the other markets, and they might be better at doing industry landscape for other countries. So we see more startups are hiring not just Koreans, because they're also targeting for global markets or regional markets. So it's happening, but I wouldn't say it's as diverse as what you would see in Singapore or in the US, but it's much more diverse than how we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, I definitely see a lot of momentum. You know, my other general partner is a great fan of BTS, you know, and also the movie industry and you know, K-pop. It's amazing how global the Korean industry has become in terms of embracing global audiences. So that's a great a lesson for Japan to learn as well. With large companies, innovation Is it being promoted because of diversity? Is it, do you see impact? I know your company, for example, is really trying to embrace diversity, but does it really have impact in terms of, your innovative product development, for example?
Yes, definitely. Even though we haven't been able to quantify the impact of diversity, but yeah, so three of us, I think, went to business school, and we learned the 5 forces model, the barriers to entry, but those kind of static analysis of positioning of corporate is no longer viable under this VUCA world, the world with volatility, uncertainty, complexity. So what will be the competitive advantage of companies? I think diversity will be, and I think diversity is one element. The whole concept is the culture of the company, receptive to have empathy to the consumers. I think we talked about trust, I think in an earlier session, having trust in citizens and gaining trust from the consumer. Those cultures, I think, will be the driving force for I think the theme for this G1 Global is innovative resilience. So I think diversity will be the key element for creating value going forward under this uncertain world.
Actually, that got me thinking. Before the session, we're just talking about how much diversity we have within ourselves. Female, male, nationalities. But one element of diversity we don't have is educational backgrounds, right? And that's actually a difficult one to address here. So 4 out of 5 people here, we went to HBS. We were just joking that Cindy went to slightly less prestigious school called Stanford. But the point here is we tend to have a very homogeneous background when it comes to education or socioeconomic background. And that's another element of diversity we really have to think about, just not gender, nationality. And we have not, in my opinion, I'm not doing a very good job just looking at my team at the fund. And probably similar, Daiichi Life, I'm sure you have very similar backgrounds of people in terms of educational background. Jonathan, what do you think? What can we do given the situation that we're in terms of having a very common background when it comes to education, social, economic backgrounds? Are there things that we can do to make sure that we are embracing different viewpoints?
This is a tough one, right? So thanks. But look, I think about this in a couple of different levels. First of all, diversity of thought it's not as though people from one school or from one background or even from one family think about things the same way. And I think it's the role and the challenge of somebody who's putting together a multinational or a multicultural team to think about how those people are going to interact and whether, first of all, they can communicate and collaborate, and then how they can be additive and whether that difference can be additive in a meaningful way. So I do think that in certain academic environments, you can learn better how to interact with and build on the differences and actually leverage those differences. So that's something that I certainly look to. But you also find people from very different backgrounds who have the same or better skills that are that have come from different places. And then the other thing that if you're a card player, you can randomize the deck. You can split. You can shuffle the deck. But after a certain point, there's not much to be gained by additional shuffles. But after the 7th time or the 8th or the 10th time, I don't think we're anywhere near that societally, and certainly not in Japan. But when you think about how many different ways to cut diversity and how many different definitions you want to take, I think it in some cases boards make themselves crazy by thinking about, too many dimensions. And it's important. That's why it's a tough one. I'll leave it there.
In some, I've seen interesting cases where companies are starting to use technology to make sure that there are really no discrimination. There's no discrimination against people who did not attend certain schools, and some of those typical, I guess, screening process, based on schools, education background, that can be minimized because of, I guess, a different sort of options that companies now have thanks to technology. So maybe we will get there. It's harder for smaller, operations like ourselves, but certainly it's starting with large companies, right? So maybe that might help as well. And we have just a couple more minutes, but I wanted to ask all of you what you would suggest to really promote diversity on our side, i.e. capitalist side. There's tons, I'm sure there's tons that we can do, but maybe Cheryl, you can start. You're already doing really exciting initiative in terms of focusing or promoting female founders in Silicon Valley. But if you can share with us in terms of what you would suggest to further promote this really good momentum we've been talking about in the last 40 minutes or so.
Right. Well, thank you. It's been a good discussion. A couple points. I would make that there have been studies, and Cindy pointed to this a little bit, that when you have diverse GPs allocating capital to startups, you're going to get more diverse startups, and that's been proven out. And so I would like to see more women, more people from underrepresented communities in the capital allocation space, because then that is going to go into the networks. As John was just saying, we're just, as humans, we have a network that we normally interact in. And I mean, I've seen this with even our accelerator. We brought in some Hispanic and Black women onto our board and into our mentor program, and voila, our entrepreneurs, our Hispanic and Black entrepreneurs in our program grew. Surprise, surprise. It was reaching out into those networks. So I would say those two things. More diverse capital allocators in venture, in PE, for sure, and then the diverse network of founders would come. One thing I did just quickly want to mention here in California, you've probably read, there's been legislation for public boards to have at least one female founder, and for larger boards up to 2 to 3 female founders. And that has been very, very successful. It has doubled the number of females on boards. And I think, as we pointed out, when you're a public company in this rapidly changing world, having that diversity, and we have seen here legislation can work. I know it's a very controversial subject, but it moved fast. From 2018 to 2021, we doubled the number of women on boards here.
Thank you. Cindy, may I ask you the same question?
Yeah, so as Cheryl mentioned, I think showing examples really allow good, I guess, next generation of diversity. So what I've seen in my portfolio, we invested in back in 2013, we invested in a founder who's not from very prestigious background, but we invested in him because he had great potential and great passion. And that country, I won't mention which country, it's one country in Southeast Asia. He has become more than unicorn, more than decacorn now in that country. And he's bringing so much more hope for not just very elite society of the country, but everybody, that if he or she has passion to bring innovation forward, and they can create huge impact and also create great wealth for them and for many people who are working with them. So I would love to create that similar example in many more countries. So people with, not just very similar socioeconomic background can succeed. Anyone with great passion and work ethic can succeed. I think will spur up more innovation and also increase diversity.
Seeing is believing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, I'll go back again. What would you suggest? You already have said that things have been changing quite a bit, but if you were to take actions, or if you were to make suggestions, so that we can pick up more speed in terms of having more diversity in the Japanese context, especially in the context of venture capitalists, what would you say?
I hate to turn it around, but I think you're doing it with your
trying.
funds. Actually, no, seriously, because you're a very visible example of leading women in Japan, and I can't tell you the number of people who I've spoken to. Everybody knows what you guys are doing, and is very proud. So I think the best thing is for you to succeed, and for you guys to do really, really well.
Well, pressure. We're like pressure. We have to succeed.
Well, sorry. I know you have enough pressure already, but the fact is that I think people need examples. People need to look up to somebody who they can, who sort of resonates to them, right? And if that's schoolgirls in Japan looking up to see, can I actually run a company rather than just serve a lower level job? That's really important. And so I think that visibility is important. And so I think the things that you're doing, sorry, this is a little komasure, I guess, but the things that you're doing just publicly as well, I think are very important. So anyway.
Great, thank you. So Inagaki-san, what would you suggest? Things we can do, we should do.
Mm-hmm. I think, especially for Japanese companies, we have to first tackle the gender diversity and all diversity. So I think the ultimate goal is to represent our consumer or our society. So the board should represent our business, the entire business, the diversification of our business. Philip Kotler, that's the famous marketing guru, he's now advocating H2H, which is human to human. So ultimately, the B2C business model, B2B business model, ultimately with the technology of digital, it will be ultimately fine-tuned to human. And so if you cannot, resonate against the society, your business does not succeed. And those asymmetry of information between business to consumer is now vanishing with the digital technologies. The information is everywhere. So I think ultimately we have to represent our consumer base, our society, and diversification has to go to that limit to be resilient in this uncertain world. That's my take.
Well, thank you. Great suggestions. We're supposed to focus on actions and suggestions in this program. So I think we're doing well on that front. And I think we are now, moving to Q&A sessions, and we would like to take questions if there are any from the audience here. We can also take questions online as well, but let's start here because there are a couple of questions. Would you mind? Yes, would you mind just, there's a microphone there. We'll get to that next one over there.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentations. As we know, most of the world is facing aging society, and I'm wondering, in terms of for startups and these kind of new ventures, will there be new opportunities for like more, I guess, more elderly people to contribute to the startup environment? So thank you.
Okay. Not that I'm trying to disclose my age, but I'm in my 50s. And Kathy, so are you? So 3 GPs, general partners. We've been around for a little while and started to do this new venture capital fund. So I think there's going to be another 50 years ahead of us. I hope. So that's one way to answer your question. But what I would love, actually, maybe because you are, your company actually spends a lot of time thinking about, demographic challenge that this country is facing.
Yes, so definitely, I think, especially in Japan with the aging society, we have to represent the aging population, and with difficulty in transforming message to the aged society, the elderly people, there has to be some innovation how to create solutions to the elderly people, and they can participate in those problem solving. So a tie up with a young venture and with a seasoned elderly people with experience and knowledge, I think we will create a huge, immense amount of value if we do a right matching. So very good point.
Actually, I'd like to ask Cindy, if you don't mind, with the same question, because Korea is also facing a very serious aging, population. The question is, do you see situations where older people will be part of this ecosystem for startups?
So I think the current startup ecosystem is definitely more geared towards younger generation. That is for sure. However, I think it really depends who you're speaking with. So if you're elder generation who are very tech savvy, who is welcome to adopt new trends, then definitely they will be able to adjust to the startup culture. However, if you are against technology, you're not really using, when you're shopping for things, you're not really using e-commerce, then it may be very tough transition for both the potential employee, and also the startup. So I think it really you have to be more tech friendly to be able to join the startup ecosystem. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think so too. Actually, Cheryl, I'd like to ask you the same question as well. I mean, so Silicon Valley is also, to me, very youngish, 20-something, 30-something, if so. Do you see any elements of older population being important part of the ecosystem, startup ecosystem in Silicon Valley?
Well, I would agree with Cindy that there's definitely a youth focus, and there always has been in my experience in Silicon Valley. But what you're starting to see, and I'm with you, Yumiko, I'm in my 50s, so I'm part of this, is you're starting to see people, maybe in their 50s, who've had experience in the Valley, partnering up with millennials and Gen Zs to help them accelerate their businesses. And I really think that those relationships are incredibly valuable, because we have the experience of having seen all the things that can happen on the road to building a company, and can help them understand and mitigate some of those challenges. So that pairing up of mentors and younger entrepreneurs, whether it's as advisors, board members, investors, you are seeing fairly regularly here, and I do think it's effective and good for both generations.
Thank you. May I take one question from the audience and then go to online questions? I think there was one over there, if you don't mind. Just
Thanks very much. My name is Sinead from Woven Planet. I'm just wondering, in a complex ecosystem like venture, it works well when you have a lot of natural checks and balances. So maybe especially for Cheryl, are you starting to see situations where founders are willing to walk away from capital because they're not happy with the diversity of the partners in a firm? And also, are you seeing investors refusing or balking from investing capital into a fund that doesn't have a diverse partner structure?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I would say, yes, you're starting to see it. We certainly had a strong Me Too movement here in the US. I know it's gone global. And I will say that there are many female entrepreneurs here who will, challenge and look at the investors' record in that area, because there's pledges and there's work to do on that front, and we'll walk away. And I've seen that happen. And we're seeing firms, mine one of them, and many others that are focused on being a place where we're welcome diverse founders and make sure everybody's comfortable. And so yes, you are seeing that, and you're seeing some of the bigger funds that I've worked with for years that have been, very traditionally male dominated, really working to try to add diverse partners and to do some work. And then there's others giving lip service. So we have the whole range.
thank you. Let's just take some questions from online.
So we have one question, which I'll read now, and it's from Tatsuo Kawasaki. So he's asking, do we aim to generate same superb returns with diversity, or should there be a double bottom line so that some investments will be high return generation and some will be diversity promoting? Are there different views between asset owners versus GPs?
Very good question. Maybe Cindy, would you mind answering that question?
This is a very tough question. So far, there hasn't been discussion. As far as I'm aware, I haven't seen a discussion where you have double bottom lines. So whether you are investing in for higher return or diversity, it has to, if it's an investment, it has to generate return. So it's that much tougher. So to ensure both, but this needs to happen. And I think maybe depending on who your LPs are, some LPs, if you're investing in a fund, perhaps the hurdle rate, what I've heard was hurdle rate for certain funds are lower because they wanted to ensure certain ESG element. So it really depends on who the LPs of the funds are. So perhaps, yeah, maybe this answer is addressing your question. So if depending on the LP, and the hurdle rate will differ.
So in the case of large companies, so for example, Daiichi Life, what do you have different metrics in terms of financial returns depending on where you focus on, where there's diversity fitting in that whole metrics?
Yeah, it's a tough question, but I think we should aim for a double win. So the return to the society and economic return at the same time. And I think the whole topic for today is that there is a space that we can aim. I personally think that for the business to succeed and to be a sustainable business, we have to address the ESG issues. It's maybe a prerequisite for economic return. You have to address the social issues. So yeah, that's my take.
I hope we can prove this theory with our fund. We started this fund believing that we can achieve competitive financial returns by integrating ESG into our investment process. So we don't position ourselves as I guess, social impact fund, which would have a different set of metrics when it comes to measuring their financial returns. We are going to be aiming for competitive financial returns. And again, we are a new fund. I hope we can prove it. But at the end of the day, we do think ESG or diversity, we are discussing in a context of economic value. I think companies who can grow sustainably, who can grow and really bring a very strong returns to financial investors are the ones who actually integrate ESG. So let's hope we can do it, and let's hope we can actually see more funds like this in the future. I think we may have time for maybe one more last question. If there is a question from the audience we can take.
Hi, this is Kazi from Just In Case. Maybe a little bit primitive, more primitive questions. If you support the minority, there might be, anger from the majority by the affirmative action. My personal opinion is more like it should be more like we want to diversify rather than we have to diversify. Do you have any tips or mechanism you observe in your, organization or your companies, if anything?
So rather than being told, it should be, is the way I understand the question is, it should be really the mindset. It should not be driven by some regulations or, compliance officer telling you to do certain things. Is that the right way to understand the question? And if so, maybe, どうですか?
Look, depending on your theory of how the market works, I think a lot of people think that the market itself is imperfect and doesn't self-correct, right? And so that would argue for a certain degree of intervention in order to fix things when they get out of whack. And clearly, we're very far from 50-50. So you can, for male, female, sort of board stewardship or a CEOship. So I think you can argue pretty convincingly that things are out of whack and could result, could benefit from some adjustment. At the same time, as an entrepreneur, I see that and I see an opportunity. Right. And so you would think that should be self-correcting. So I believe that both are possible at the same time and that can accelerate the change. And so particularly with, particularly as somebody who's investing in startups in Japan, it's a great opportunity because there's so much of one kind of thinking that bringing in people who have a different way of thinking have potential to make a breakthrough product and service. And so that's something that sort of lights my fire as an investor, even though, my investments are a lot smaller than these guys. So.
Well, thank you so much. I think we are just about to run out of time. So again, I wanted to thank all the great comments made by amazing panelists today. This session is about diversity, but quite frankly, I think going forward, all sections at G1 Global, diversity will become very natural part of any discussions, any sessions going forward. You don't even have to think about diversity, particularly now that we realize this is actually not just charity. This is actually going to help your growth. This is going to help your business. So hopefully we will be picking up even more momentum to promote different places I can see a lot of different faces in this audience. That's also very encouraging as well. So again, thank you so much, and let's give them a big hand. Thank you so much for the participation.